All right, let's roll on to Paul Reed. B-Ball Paul. Here are his stats. 5 games, 17 plus a game, 12 boards a game, 4.6 offensive boards, 4.8 stocks per game. He had a plus minus of +8 on the court, 40% from three, only 10 attempts. He shot 58+% inside the paint, and he had that 27-20 4-4 game versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. That was by far one of the biggest individual performances of the Summer League. We have Ian Acosta joining us. What is up, guys? Thanks for joining, man. Comment. We're talking about player grades here from the Sixers Summer League. I gave him an A-. That doesn't necessarily reflect how I'm looking at Paul Reed moving forward, but for strictly Summer League purposes, I gave him an A-. What about you, Tiago? How would you grade Paul Reed in this Summer League?
So I think energy, activity, that gets an A across the board. Like, there's no question that Paul Reed is just a high energy, like a nightmare to defend. A great potential defensive player. So that gets an A across the board. But when you talk about translating that game to the NBA, that's where I'm still a little bit unsure about Paul Reed, because he does not have a very consistent shot. He gets a little bit wild off the drive. I mean, he shows hints of, dribble drive game and a shooting game and pick and roll, but it's just not all there. So the question I have with Paul Reed is, like, if you're going to have a guy play 10 to 15 minutes behind Joel Embiid, like, what are you banking on him to do offensively that you can count on, right? Because if as bad as Dwight Howard's fit was, you can count on him to grab offensive rebounds, putbacks, and play off the pick and roll. So is Paul Reed that player? I don't know. I mean, he's a little bit more undersized, and the shot itself, I mean, it's just not. It just doesn't look as something that's going to be very reliable in the NBA, at least not right now. So, I mean, I don't want to say anything negative about Paul Reed because it was such a great watch throughout the Summer League, but I'm still struggling to see how does this guy translate into the NBA. And again, this is not to say that he should not play. I think he should play a lot to begin the year for them to find out what they have in this guy. But again, right now, I think overall, I would give him kind of a B to B+ based on everything I just kind of mentioned.
What about you, Austin? What's your grade on Paul Reed from everything you saw in the Summer League?
Give him an A. I think, like, if the biggest flaw for him at times is he tries to do so much, and he he doesn't really doesn't really stay inside of, like, a box per se of what his role is and what he should be doing and shouldn't be doing. And I tried to ask him about this, and I basically asked him, are you like has the discussion with coaching staff been like explore your comfort zone and really be bold, or is it be more like play within the role that we envisioned for you with the team in the future? And he said it was more that than actually getting crazy. So I think he's trying to test his boundaries a little bit of creation off the dribble. He tries to go with like this isolation stuff, and it's kind of funny because you're getting there, and then it's like, never mind.
But sometimes you'll hit one. Like, sometimes you take it off the dribble and dunk, like, holy crap, Paul Reed. But
yeah, but his jumper is extremely hitchy, which does not help. I think it's something that can translate. I just think, like, when you're looking at what he does, you want a guy who is going to have an incredibly electric second effort, and he's really good at, like, sneaking into the offensive glass and getting putbacks, and if he mistimes the jump, he's right there to put it back up again. And so I think he does, and he's a really he's a good rim protector. We saw in Summer League, he's athletic, he's long, he can defend multiple guys, he can go out in the perimeter and switch. I think there's a lot of stuff there that there is to work with. He's just incredibly raw, but I think that's sort of an exciting adventure because that means that there's a very wide array of things that he could potentially do.
Do you see a Jeremy? Sorry, before just one question. Do you see a Jeremy Grant trajectory with him?
Yes, I see a mixture of Christian Wood, Jeremy Grant, and Paul Millsap.
that's a quite a group, man.
That's a huge array. We're gonna get into that. That's my next question about Paul Reed, but real quickly, Justin.
Let me ask you this. Sorry about that. If you were to redraft the class, where does he go in the first round? Does he go first round?
Oh, he's definitely first round. There's no question. I mean, the amount of raw skill that he's shown, like I said, he's only shot 2 3-point attempts in the summer league. The dude shot 44% from 3 during the Blue Coats season when he won the MVP. So in terms of raw skill, someone would take just a flyer on him in the first round. There's no question about that.
Would he go lottery?
No, I don't think so.
Probably
if he's got his Blue Coats numbers, if he has his Blue Coats numbers out of college, then yes.
Oh yeah.
If he's getting his 20, 10, 44, like 50, high 50% and 44% from 3, yes.
My guess is he'd probably go like 16 to 18 range is probably where he'd go.
I mean, look at Josh Primo.
Yeah.
18-year-old, pure raw skill, great shooter, catch and shoot shooter, very little data, and he was a lottery pick. So right. You never know.
But my point is, in posing that is, I don't think it's so crazy that he could be Paul Mill. He's a mixture of Paul Millsap, Christian Wood, and Jeremy Grant, guys that were drafted, 46th overall, 37th overall, whatever it was, and undrafted.
Yeah, Ian says 15 to 19 range. I agree with that. I think that's exactly where I would be. All right, Justin, real quick, what's your grade on Paul Reed in this summer?
Grade on Paul Reed, I think it's an A. And to be honest, I don't know if you go any lower than that. I mean, the guy literally, to me, he played just like his G League MVP self last year. I saw a lot of the similar game that I saw all during the bubble for him. One thing I want to say about his shooting and the hitchiness to it, yes, he's a catch and shoot shooter. Like, he's not good. He's not a great shooter like when he's trying to create in the sense where he's just holding the ball, goes and shoots it. But the one thing that I saw consistently when they were in the G League and even here in the Summer League is that when he was playing the 5, he did a lot of what Joel Embiid does in the NBA now, where it's coming up behind the offense and behind the defense and shooting at the top of the arc. And he was shooting that at a very consistent level. That's part of the reason why I could see him running the 5-man at times in the NBA. But when it comes to Thiago, you were alluding this a little bit. What is his fit going to be, and what's his role? What would his role be? I think obviously Andre Drummond is going to be like the backup center this year. But I do think on matchup-based things where there is a lot of teams who run a smaller backup center, who run a small center in general, that I think that in certain matchups he could be brought out to guard those kinds of guys.
Well, I think there's a very strong case for him to be the primary backup if you're looking at a situation where opponents are going small. It's a playoff series, and they're trying to force Andre Drummond to guard in space. He can't do that, but Paul Reed can. Now, maybe that's where when we're reviewing Doc's second season, we're thinking, well, they lost again because he refused to play Paul. He refused to not go to a young guy who was clearly a better option, and maybe that's something that when all is said and done, Doc has to take to the evaluation table when he goes to get his year-end performance review.
Yeah, and I do want to say with that, Paul Reed, I think this was a question a lot of people had for him, is if he, because of his size and because of the comparisons to Jeremy Grant, is he a capable perimeter defender? I think a lot of people had questions for him in that, and I think in a lot of ways he's answered those questions in a lot of different times. Sure, there's times where there's lapses. That's going to happen with a rookie like last year, but there's a good portion of times where he is really good at sinking his hips and staying with small ball handlers. Most of his steals, and I said this last year when we were reviewing him after the season, is most of his steals are like against perimeter guards, of him being able to get his hands in there and tap the ball away. You see a lot of guys his size only get him in the lane, or maybe when the center or whatever like just mishandles a ball. A lot of his steals are out on the perimeter guarding smaller defenders. So I think that's a really good sign.
All right, I'm going to redirect this real quick because that goes into our next question. What is the most realistic projection for Paul Reed with the Sixers moving forward? We've already kind of touched on it, Is there a path that you could see Paul Reed backing up Joel Embiid at some point next year? Is it, like, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think especially when they're matched up against smaller lineups, I think Paul Reed should absolutely be the first option off the bench in that kind of 4 or 5 role. So I do think there's a path for him there. One more point on Paul Reed, because I was noticing watching the video, and I kind of wrote down on my notes as well, is he's got like great hands. Like, he catches stuff in traffic. Like, it's very impressive. And it's just a testament of the Sixers scouting department there, because to find a guy that late in the draft, I mean, they knocked the 2020 draft out of the ballpark with those 3 guys, and it's really a testament to how they found that guy, man. It's quite impressive.
Shout out to Vince Rosman and John Hollinger, I guess.
Yeah.
Any
Well,
take?
he's not part of the Sixers staff, just to clarify. He's not part of the Sixers staff, but he is a Paul Reed guy. So,
Okay. Any take on Paul Reed getting playing time on the Sixers next year? Any thoughts on that, guys? Justin,
I mean,
Austin. Go ahead. No. All right.
okay. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a very good possibility, especially with how much success he had in the G League last year, and the fact that, like, obviously when Dwight came in here, we all knew that he was going to be the backup, because they didn't really know what Paul Reed was. I think now that, like, Reed actually has the chance to get in camp and, like, get work with the starters and, like, see how Doc feels him out, I think there's a better shot at him doing that. I will say Andre Drummond's a very capable backup. Like, obviously this guy is a very good basketball player, but kind of like Tiago was saying, and I said earlier, I do think that Reed has a role on this team. I think we're kind of leaving out the thought of Georges Niang. Now, Georges Niang is a guy who is more of a stretch 4 than a stretch 5, in my opinion. But that I think it's going to be between those two who are going to be playing that small ball 5, in my opinion.
It all hinges on what the heck they do with Ben Simmons. That's really, for me, what it comes down to. What about you, Austin? What do you expect from Paul Reed next year for the Sixers?
I mean, one part of me thinks, like, Doc is who Doc is, and we shouldn't expect him to play a young guy. Another part of me thinks, like, it's very obvious to me, and this is partially sourced and partially me just looking at the situation. Very obvious to me.
It's sourced, everybody. It's
very obvious to me that Daryl wants Doc to play Paul Reed. I mean, he didn't go out and he said, "I want to get a stretch 5. We need to have that backing up Joel." Goes out and signs Andre Drummond. He's very clearly, and I think last season trading away Tony Bradley was his way of gently trying to push Paul Reed into Doc's lap. Be like, "This is your guy. Play him." And it didn't happen. So I think, if Doc has any sense of pride, he will decide to adapt and realize, okay, I had to start going young, because the guys that I've played, Montrezl Harrell, Dwight Howard, Andre Drummond, whatever, I've just gotten embarrassed in like 2 straight playoffs. This can't happen again.
Is Austin wavering on Doc? Are you
No.
wavering? You're wavering on Doc.
No.
Don't give in, Austin. You're on the island of your own right now.
No, I'm not. Listen, you can't. I have very little criticism of Doc Rivers right now. He led them to their best season in 20 years. His point guard literally forgot how to play basketball during the playoffs when it mattered most, and I just it's very hard for me to blame Doc. But doesn't mean he was flawless either.
Let's go on. Mac 5 says Dwight was not good off the pick and roll. He could only catch lobs when bad defenders left him.
I mean, that's part of the pick and roll. You got to catch the lobs. But he does.
Teddy says Paul Reed equals the next Christian Wood.
I don't want to put that out there. I think listen, I don't want to put expectations on Paul Reed being the next Christian Wood, because I don't know if that's exactly the case, but I think he has the capabilities to be in there. His jump shot needs to get a little less hitchy if that's the case, in my opinion.
Yep, and Christian Wood got his money. Mac 5 says I would take Paul Reed offensively over Dwight. Ian says I'm happy just to wake up knowing Mike Scott isn't on the roster.
Yeah, they
Yo, I
upgraded
think-
that position big time. That's
Yeah,
huge.
I was about to say the same thing. I genuinely like. I don't think that signing of Georges Niang was talked about enough. Like, that is a major upgrade over Mike Scott. And
A little bit.
considering how much Mike Scott played backup center at times, because when Embiid was down or when Dwight was unavailable, like the amount that Mike Scott had to play. If Georges Niang is coming in, like if Doc's envisioning him at that exact role, like that's a major upgrade. I don't know. I know Dibs, you used to know the number. Do you know what's Georges Niang's number, like percentage off catch and shoot? Do you remember?
I don't know that, but I do know that he, like, if you do like his per 36, he attempts like 9 threes per 36 or something like that, which is
Well, his catch and shoot like percentage was like high 40s, I believe.
Yeah, it was mid to
Like, it's
high
up there.
40s. It was mid to high 40s. It was like 4.5 3-point shots per game last year. Last 2 years, it's like around 3.75, I believe. And that's the thing. That's where I go back. And we kind of like gave some negatives to Paul Reed. Before we move on, like Paul Reed shot 5.7 3-pointers a game with the Delaware Blue Coats. So
Yeah.
he does shoot threes.
Yep.
So if you're just like new to watching Paul Reed in the summer league, only 2 shots a game from beyond the arc, he does shoot threes.
Yeah, and let me remind everybody too, it's not like he was shooting threes from the 4 position. Like he was playing the 5 every single game for every minute he was out there, and that was he. Like I said, he was shooting a lot of the same threes that you see Joel take. Like literally, to me, like that's exactly what I saw. I saw him playing like a Joel Embiid would in that offense. So, except for the fact that Justin Robinson and him were running pick and rolls.
Superhero says he also thinks that Paul Reed could be a Paul Millsap, former second-round
Paul
pick, makes himself Millsap. What did I say?
you said mishap.
Did I? All right, and then Ian is really going down on Austin here. Austin's giving us quotes tonight. Lots and lots of quotes.
Going down.
Jordan Nwora is the next Klay Thompson. This point guard forgot how to play basketball in the playoffs.
I mean, is
Jordan
it not true? He literally would not take Trae Young in the post.
No.
That's
Did we guys
Austin,
talk
he
about
saw something. The
um,
vision, man. The vision. He had a vision.